Thank you both. That was amazing. I'm really glad we got to do this tonight. And I also wanted to take a moment and just recognize some of the faces out in the crowd that we have. I had all my glasses on. So we have a former Edgewood City Council member, Colleen Wise. Candidate for Pierce County Council, Nancy Slotnick. We have Pierce County GOP Secretary, Nancy LaChapelle. We have Pierce County GOP Committee Woman, Jane Milhans. And the former candidate for Auditor Office, Lisa Olson.
You know you have John Shaver was county council and also the auditor. And she married a guy who also was the county chair way back when he could be a young Republican, which may have been a few months ago.
I'm going to ask a question. Are you ready?
I'm going to ask you two a question. Sorry to put you on the spot. When I go down to the auditor's office and I go into the annex building and I have to go renew all my tabs, which I have several cars, I have to show my driver's license to get car tabs. But when I go over into the election in the other building and say, I didn't get my ballot, or my signature didn't match, or something like that, I don't get asked for any ID. So, would either of you be willing to add the ID to the election side if tabs are so important to ask for ID? That's my question.
I think we actually already answered that, Jane. By the way, she was also a former chairman of the county party. And her birthday is the same as mine. The years may be slightly different. The answer is yes. If I have to show ID, that's the place you show the ID. To register to vote, you should have a birth certificate to say, I'm an American, and I'm over 18 years old. I didn't have to do that, by the way. I had to show my birth certificate and prove I was 21, but that's a different day. The bottom line is, yes, Jane, if you're coming back in to re-register or changed your name or for whatever reason, if I want services from the ballot, then I should show identification that I'm an American citizen and that I live wherever I'm registering to vote, Pierce County or precinct number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. That's the bottom line.
Maybe we just stay up here, then we don't have to trip over. In some ways, it's a little bit of a misconception because folks do show their ID. What they do is when they go to renew their driver's license at the licensing, when they get that, what are you doing? You're getting your ID. Then that's transmitted electronically over to the elections office. So in essence, people are showing their ID to register to vote. If they register to vote on a paper form, which in a lot of ways I would like to do away with, but we are never going to get away from any of the backup systems. What do we do if the system's down? You still got to have that paper backup. But when I encourage people when they're trying to do voter registration drives, I tell them, take a laptop, take an iPad, have folks do this online because it saves the county money and it stops errors. I cannot read what's on half of them voter registration forms. It's so sloppy. So to do it electronically is more efficient, and they're showing their ID because they're getting their ID. And if they do a paper form, they have to put some sort of form on ID on there. They either have to write their driver's license number on that form or the last 4 digits of their social security numbers before they're registered to vote, because we run that by a state database. And that is correct. You're right. When somebody comes into the elections office and said you want a replacement ballot or something like that, we don't ask for ID because we're not allowed to. It's prohibited by state law right now. And we would oftentimes, because it's convenient, ask somebody, do you have any ID? We can't say you have to have ID because it's a heck of a lot easier to type somebody's name in off of the printed ID. And then also, if you've been to the elections office recently, there's a little machine in there that you have to scan your ID to get your badge to come into the building. So that kind of system is available. It would be awesome to implement something like that for registering to vote. You could just scan your ID so it pulls that information in. I'm all about efficiency. But under state law, we don't have a requirement for the voter ID, and we also have you have to swear under penalty of perjury and law that you are a U.S. citizen. That's the protection. If you know somebody who's registered to vote who is not a citizen, then they lied. They broke the law when they signed that form. That's the proof. We don't have a centralized database of who are U.S. citizens, so it's not available right now. Were our country to come like many other countries do, where you have a state ID card or a country ID card, then we could do that. But currently, our legislature in their infinite wisdom hasn't implemented it because our Congress in their infinite wisdom have not made a national ID card. Were that to come into place, I would fully support that because it would sure as heck be a lot better to make sure that we're not putting people on the honor system, hoping that they really are citizens without any way to check. Because again, like that example of that Canadian woman, I don't want people who are trying to become citizens to be led astray, and I don't want people who shouldn't be voting to vote.
So you're saying that nobody needs their birth certificate anymore to go into DMV? They just go in there and swear they're American citizen and they get their driver's license. Now that's what you're saying. So these kids don't have to bring their birth certificates in anymore. Interesting.
Thank you. Just one more quick question here. So in the 2020 election, there were approximately 55,000 address shifters, meaning they transferred their address to another location. Not sure if they did it actually physically. I think it's in the RCWs that they have to be a member of the precinct or a resident of the precinct for 30 days prior to the election. But is that something that you guys would be willing to verify? Because I don't know if there's a verification in place for that right now, and there were an awful lot of ballots stamped King County that were delivered to Pierce, so.
But then we went to Hawaii, and then we went to the Philippines, and we still voted in Parkland. Somebody else owned that house, but we could still vote there because that's where we registered to vote, and we got to account for the military or the Boeing or the whatever. And we have to also, on the other side, and what she didn't ask is, what if the ballot comes back? You know, we sent it off to 12345 Main Street in Tokyo because they're deployed to the embassy or whatever. And the ballot comes back because they really aren't there anymore, they're in Korea. The ballot comes back and it sits there in the auditor's office, not the auditor's office, but it sits there in the elections department and just sits there. We had to generate a group of people who would go out to JBLM and say, if we're talking a military ballot here, we have to go back and say, where is this person? The ballot came back. They want the ballot. Where do we send it? And if they ever tell you that, we don't know, the guy who's writing the checks, he knows exactly where they're sending those checks. So we did that. And we have a system now to check all the ballots that come back as misaddressed or return to sender or that kind of thing. And we go back to them to do it. But it's not a foolproof system, because how do I account for the fact that this person went out from Boeing? He actually votes out of the U.S. Embassy, because that's where his job is, or that is the nearest American soil that they can get the U.S. post system to deliver to. How do I count that?
So you mentioned something very specific, the address shifters, right? So again, our friends in the legislature, Yeah, so our friends in the legislature, again, as I say this phrase too many times in their infinite wisdom, passed a new law which allowed for same-day registration and transfers of registration. Now, we've had same-day registration forever. Deryl, you were in the Air Force, right? So my son is also in the Air Force, and military voters have always been able to come into the office at 7:59 on election night, register to vote, and they'd be issued a ballot. That was already state law. So it wasn't an issue of registering people who were new if they were brand new. I had no issue with that. But we talked about transfers. And as you said, the declaration on the envelope says, I am a U.S. citizen, a resident of the state of Washington, and has resided in this place for 30 days. So by allowing people to transfer their registrations late, you can walk people into breaking the law because they could be lying on that oath. Now, it could be that they moved 45 days ago and had not yet registered to updated their registration. So that's why it's allowed. But there's another state law that says within 10 days of when you move, you need to go to the Department of Licensing and notify them. So now we got a confusion here is there's two laws that conflict with each other. So we're walking the citizens into breaking the law. That law needs to be cleaned up. But they handed it down to us. So us as elections administrators, we met multiple times in multiple counties and working groups to figure out how can we make sure that a voter in King County didn't drop a ballot off at their center in Renton and then drive down to Tacoma and transfer and get a ballot and vote it there. So we sat for months and how are we going to do this? How are we going to mark these ballots? So we developed the procedures to help stop that. So when you talk about those ballots that were stamped King County, what those were there were folks who transferred, they were registered in Pierce County, they transferred their registration to King County. We didn't count their ballots in Pierce County, we forwarded them to King County because they were King County voters, and the King County ballots, if there was any races in common, would have been counted. So we worked really hard to develop that. It took forever. You should have seen the whiteboards. Remember that cartoon Family Circus that had the little steps that went around where the kid went all the way around the yard and up and down? We had whiteboards looking like that. Well, what happens if somebody does this and does this and does that? So our elections professionals, we work hard to try to mitigate the impacts of what the legislature hands down. But the change to that needs to come from your legislatures. There's folks who are running into your LDs. Bring that up to them. Let them know. You know, if you got anybody who's in your LDs who's interested in dealing with some elections issues, tell them to get on that committee, the Tribal and Local Government Affairs Committee, because we'd be happy to, I'd be happy to implement any law that's put down, and I'm going to implement it the most secure and safe way that we can.
There are a lot of people out there that have the perception of voter fraud, or elections integrity issues. And so a question that I've asked over and over to Kyle and others in the elections, how can you show us observers so that we can squash the perception? Because I observe a lot of elections. And I would like to bring back my observations to the public to squash the perception, but I can't do it from the limited access I have to observe. How can an auditor sign off that an election is fair, transparent, and true when you have another agency involved? You've got the post office. So that's one question. How do you make it, how can you sign off on what you don't even have full control of? That's why I wanted to have poll voting restored. Second question is, as an observer, what ideas do you have to give us more access as observers to see the process of the entire election? And I've asked, I think it was Kyle, what percentage of the ballot can I see as an observer, or just as a public observer, not necessarily a party observer? And we don't see much. So these are issues that I wanted to resolve or see resolved. And I don't know how you guys feel, so I'd like to know. Thank you.
They're going to count this many ballots. They're going to put them into stacks of 20. And we made it sure that the observers understood that you're there to let us know if our people are not doing their procedures properly. We can't keep guys on them all the time. And so I would definitely, I know that there was the pandemic and strange things happened and different procedures were implemented and things like that. I was up in Port Angeles at Clallam County trying to figure out how we could let the observers see everything as much as they can while also complying with the rules from the health department about social distancing. And it was a challenge. It was logistically challenging. It was operationally challenging. We tried all sorts of different things. Down in Cowlitz County, what I wound up doing is I talked to the county council and I said, normally they would their opening boards were done in like a conference room, not much bigger than those sets of tables over there. And I said, well, tell me what, can we take away your upstairs council chambers and use that for ballot processing, and you guys have your council meetings down in the ballot processing center? That gave us a room that was way bigger, so we could have the observers in there so they could still socially distance and feel like they were in as part of the process. And so I definitely would expand the observer program and bring back what I used to do, where I had good trainings. We need to have observers in there. One thing, just to let you know, Pierce County and King County are about the only counties that observers even show up to. I mean, we begged people to come up in Cowlitz County and Clallam County, and like one person showed up one day. And then they left and said they were done. So we need to continue to speak with the parties. We need to continue to have those trainings and make sure those people come in. And when you talk about the agency, I'll address that really quick, that's why we have drop boxes. We got over 50 of them in the county. Those are picked up by our employees. Okay, people that have been checked, vetted, they drive county vehicles now. We used to let them drive their own vehicles. I stopped that. I started renting vehicles and using the county vehicles. That way we knew that then they also had to go through the county's background process check because they had to be on the insurance. So we do a background check on all those employees, but it's not as robust as somebody who's driving a county vehicle. So I made sure that. I also implemented a ballot tracking system, so they have smartphones that are with them, and they have to take pictures of those ballot boxes when they get there, and I can see where they're at all the time. So if you're worried about agency, use a drop box. If you're worried about those folks, come to the election center. So you can still do that. That's available. But if you're not worried about it and you trust the post office, caveat emptor, you can go ahead and use that if you want, but we're not requiring you to, because we make sure we provide our service drop box for you.
There are some additional things you can do. There are things called cameras, and they can be put up in places. I understand not wanting to, if you're an observer, for example, or you work in the elections office, you also sign an oath. And you take an oath that says, I won't give away what I see in the ballots until signatures and certification is done. But cameras are fuzzy enough where I can tell you that somebody is mucking about with a ballot, but I don't have to see everything that's on there. But I need to see it. The other place we need to see it is on the drop boxes. Why are the drop boxes just sitting out there? They're locked up in some cases at night, for example, but there are people who come by, and they have pictures of this in Georgia and some other places, Philadelphia, where people come by with buckets of ballots. Now, in some cases, in the family, I drop off 3 ballots each time. Fine, that's fine, we're covered. In fact, the law covers us, and the practices of the office support that. That's fine. But when you come in with a couple hundred, you have to ask, how'd that happen? And who did it, and why, and how it...
NGOs.
Where'd they come from?
NGOs.
So maybe a couple of ballot boxes, cameras can be up on high. The birds can sit on it if they want to, but at least the observers know. And we can watch that kind of thing. And then trace it down and talk to whomever we need to talk to in the legal, in the prosecutor's office to figure some of this out. But those are the kinds of things we can do. Now, at one point, as a matter of fact, When I became deputy auditor, one of the things we had was a bunch of red lines on the floor. And you couldn't come closer to the teams of counters than this red line allowed. We took them away because you should be able to walk around now. No touching, no touching. But you should be able to walk around and see what they're doing, how they're doing it. And one of the reasons we had observers, for example, was in some places in the United States where we had they're checking the ballots, look under the fingernails. Ink was under the fingernails so they could make marks. And all you have to do is make a couple of marks, and now you have an overvote. Too many. Now you have to go back and figure out who's doing what to whom. You just canceled a vote. Not good. So we need cameras and the observers, and Damon is absolutely correct. This county itself used to have really difficult times finding observers. And some years, a whole bunch of Democrats would show up, fine, they were observers. And some years, in fact, it's the last 4 or 5, we really fill up the House. But the point is, it's really hard to do because we have to have X number of people, they have to sign up for various kinds of shifting patterns. And on election night, there is no end until it's done. It's hard to find people, but we have them, we'll keep using them, but we need to make it so that they can see with cameras, and that extends their capabilities of watching.
Well, they have cameras, and I've found 2 elections that they're not on, and I've had to tell the elections to turn
Yeah.
on.
And also cameras on the ballot, on the boxes.
I like these ballots.
Like 10 minutes left while we end the Q&A, and then we can carry on with each other and do some visiting before we have to leave.
Sure.
Okay.
I want to sit down for a second.
Okay.
I need to stand up for a second.
Well, I don't mind. Well, how old is that?
It's an athletic event, really.
Like 2000,